Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast at Genesis Communications Network in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line is up and running, 605-477-3249. Steve Elkins is with us live in Florida in the path of the hurricane. Welcome, Steve.
Hey there, Vinny. How you doing?
Good. Steve, I just wanted to share one quick thing before we get into today's broadcast about preparedness for things like storms, hurricanes, ice storms, floods, those kinds of things, inclement weather. We have had here at our farm 3 John Deere riding lawnmowers. Now, these are a little bit bigger than the ones that you see at Home Depot and Lowe's and, you know, the Chinese factory outlet when they sell them. But they're green, and they have, you know, green and yellow wheels, the John Deere colors. They are branded John Deere. And all 3 of them have 42-inch mowers. And all 3 of them had broken, cracked decks. And I'm talking about the mower deck that contains the spinning blades. All 3 of them had decks that cracked and had to be welded back together or they would not operate. I'm not talking about little cracks. I'm talking about substantial cracks, broken bracketry, broken transmission mounts. I'm talking about major design flaws. And I hope John Deere is listening, and I hope they call their lawyer and threaten me so that we can get into this in a much greater detail with pictures and so forth. But what I'm saying is, when you buy, whether it's an appliance like a refrigerator, and you find out that your door liner, the part where the plastic part that holds your jars and butter and things like that breaks and cracks, and you think, gosh, am I the only one? The answer is no. In my view, you're not the only one. Are you the only one with these lousy John Deere mower decks and transmission brackets and stamped steel? We can't even call them a frame. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's what the frame used to be. But now it's this stamped steel, thin structure that is poorly engineered. Not enough steel, not enough gussets, not enough weld, not enough material. When yours breaks, are you the only one? No. When the support that holds the little axle stud, which is the bolt that the wheel rides on, that's on your push mower or your self-propelled mower, and the deck breaks there, and you go, geez, I guess we're the only ones. No, you're not the only ones. This is a result of forced obsolescence, poor planning, poor materials, substandard everything. Materials, planning, design, construction, everything. It's of poor quality all the way around. And I just wanted to share that with you. So 3 out of 3, substandard. 3 out of 3. And they're all similar. So when you want to spend that extra $500, the $2,000 for that little riding mower, and you say, well, I'll spend it, maybe the $500 to $1,000 to have a green one with yellow wheels, you're probably going to find out that it's not much better. And there is a rash of engine failures as a result of just pressing in the studs or the valve guides in these Briggs & Stratton engines. They get hot, and the valve guides pop out, and the engine will no longer run properly. And what's the repair? probably around $600 or $700 to repair that substandard design. How do I know? We've got one of them here. It's a Poulin Pro, and it's worse than a John Deere. Well, in some respects, it's worse than a John Deere. Substandard every way you look at it. So I just wanted to share with you that if you buy one of these mowers at the big box store, it's probably made by the same company, MTD. That used to be called Murray. That was the cheap lawnmower that Walmart used to sell, Murray. And now it's MTD. And what do they make? They make a whole bunch of these different colored lawnmowers. Lots of brand names, same factory. Same factory. Any comments, Steve Elkins? Have you seen, in your experience, have you seen friends and neighbors with broken lawnmowers that, gosh, I've only had them 10 years and they failed?
Yeah, actually I have, Vincent. I agree with you. The corporations are cutting back on materials. You can use the same example as the automobile industry. I mean, look back in the 50s, the steel they used in their cars. I mean, you couldn't. We have storms now out in Texas and Oklahoma when I used to live there, and the cars would just be pelted with the hail, and you'd have dents all over your car. That would never happen back in the 50s and early 60s. The metal was much thicker. So, yeah, corporations are trying to find ways to increase their profit margin, and they're going to cut back on resources. The metal's not going to be quite as thick. It's going to, they fix that. Actually, they cover that up. Their faults of what they cut back on with making it fancy. You mentioned the fancy colors. All those fancy colors, oh my gosh, it's just beautiful. It looks great. But tap on it a little bit, and you realize pretty soon that it's either plastic, or a lot of stuff is plastic, or just very thin metal. So, kind of covering up the flaw with attractiveness, a color. That's a good little marketing strategy there to cut back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, family was in the vehicle yesterday. We went to the big city, Springfield, Missouri, and I was at a traffic light, and I looked over to my right, and there was this relatively new, I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3 year old Chevy roller skate. I'm talking a tiny Chevrolet, and great big Chevy logo on this little tiny car, and the door was crashed in. And I said to the family, look at that door. Doesn't it look like that door is so thin? What do you think happened to that door? And our son said, shopping cart. And I mean, this, you would think that if that kind of a wrinkle in a 1950s, 60s vehicle, maybe all the way up into the 80s, if you took the door off and laid it down on a sidewalk or a driveway, for example, and then you jumped up and down on the skin of the door, you wouldn't be able to wrinkle it the way this door was crashed in because the metal is so thin. So, class, as you drive around and you look at these new cars and you look at these huge sections of damaged sheet metal, just think about how thin must that steel be in order to make that kind of damage. And you'll probably come away with the thought that the paint plus, the primer, plus the colored coat, plus the clear coat is probably, that combination of the paint is probably thicker than the steel. Yeah. I think that's what you'll come away with.
On top of that, Vinny, the cars are lighter today because a lot of plastic parts and just really thin steel. You think, the manufacturer would say, well, we did that for economic reasons, actually save you cost on purchasing a car, and also will increase your fuel consumption, your fuel miles per gallon. And, of course, we know that hasn't happened. We're actually really far behind, and that technology has been suppressed. Now, I remember back in the 70s when the Honda CRX came out, a little small car, and it supposedly got 67 miles per gallon under ideal conditions. 67 miles an hour in miles per gallon back in the 70s. Now, you think back then, okay, where should we be now with miles per gallon on our cars? And we're stuck at around 23, 24 on your SUVs. They've suppressed this technology, no doubt about it, for the corporations. And we should be far, far surpassed the 67 miles per gallon. But that technology has been squashed for good reason. They're just going to, this is their domain. They're not going to give us great miles per gallon on our cars. That's technology that's been suppressed.
That's correct. And it used to be that, back in the 60s, 70s, maybe even into the 80s, that if you looked at the vehicles manufactured in Europe, they got way better fuel economy than we got in the United States, assuming the same weight vehicle. So, for example, if you took a Mercedes from Europe versus that same Mercedes badged in the United States, the European one would get better fuel economy, more miles per gallon. Well, since the EPA has put all these devices like exhaust gas recirculation and catalytic converters and all these other engine pollution control devices, the economy went down and down and down. So the automakers figured out that they could use less steel, as you mentioned, and still sell the cars. And they make them look nice. They're appealing in terms of when you look at one in the showroom. Well, and one other way that automobile manufacturers have reduced the costs of producing a new car is by removing the spare tire, the jack, and the tools to change that tire and to jack up the car. In 2017, 28% of new car models in 2017 were sold without a spare tire as standard equipment. Can you imagine that? 28% sold without a spare tire as standard equipment. And is there a law? Is it illegal to not have a spare? Nope. There's no legal obligation to carry a spare tire, and nor does the manufacturer have an obligation to provide a spare tire in your vehicle. I have here at the farm a 1968 American Motors Ambassador station wagon. That was their flagship model, the Ambassador. And it was called a cross country. This particular one, I bought it for the engine. Brad Pitt used to ride around in this when he was a child. So we have that vehicle. I mean, it's not really important that Brad Pitt's butt was in this vehicle, but this particular station wagon came with a spare tire, a full-size spare tire, not one of these inflatable spare tires, not one of these little donuts, but a full-size spare tire with the same exact wheel painted to match the vehicle as the four wheels that are on the outside of the car. So now you have 5 wheels, 5 tires, all identical. And what you could do is, we used to rotate tires, because if you had a 5th tire and wheel, you could put that on and rotate the tires and get maximum wear out of all the tires. And it worked great. But we don't do that anymore. We don't rotate our tires. Well, we do here at the farm. We do it all the time. That's why we lubricate the lug nuts with synthetic grease, because those lug nuts are going on and off and on and off a lot. And we would wear out the studs and the lug nuts if we didn't lubricate them. So, class, if you decide that you're going to lubricate the lug nuts on your wheels, you must torque them down. Okay? And don't do it because we do it. Do your own research. Because if that lug nut comes off because you haven't torqued it properly, don't blame us. Okay? We do it. I'm not suggesting you do it, but if you want to, look it up and make sure you do it right. There's plenty of information on it on the internet. Steve Elkins and I will be right back. Steve Elkins is with us. He's a broadcaster. He appears every weekend, Sundays, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Republic Broadcasting Network. And you can find him. Let's go to Republic Broadcasting Network, and you'll see these there, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time. I wanted to mention that Doc Ram.
I wanted to add something to your last comment, Vinny.
Sure.
Yeah, that we need politics. You talk about the spare tire. You're right; they're missing on these cars, and that we need laws. We need legislation because manufacturers don't have common sense. I'm just so blown away that you buy a car, you look in the trunk, and there's no spare tire. It's pretty sad that the common sense, for some reason, their profit margin, they want to increase their profit margin, that they're willing to cut something that's very, very important from your automobile. You should have a spare tire and a jack. These are just common things you need. And that they finally, somebody in the boardroom sat down and said, you know what, where can we save more money? Well, let's kick around this idea. let's get rid of the spare tire, let's get rid of the jack. People don't know how to change tire anyway, probably, and they'll just call the tow wrecker service, and they'll do the job anyway. So, we can save some money this way. But I do believe that is a necessity, and it's unfortunate that these people aren't smart enough to see that, and that they're just full of greed. So let's have some legislation. But then again, the legislators are too busy, darn busy right now, Vince, writing legislation to determine which bathroom we're supposed to be using. So, there you go, tied up.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the spare tire for just another couple of seconds. By the way,
Sure.
Doc Ram called me this morning, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. He has laryngitis, and that's why he's not with us today, but he will be back next Thursday, as usual, on the regular schedule. So he has laryngitis, and although he's okay, he'd be very difficult to hear, and it'd be difficult for him to speak. So that's why Dr. Richard Allen Miller's not with us today. And Steve Elkins, I called him at the last minute. I asked him if he would like to join me today, and there he was. He said, sure. And so within with less than 15 minutes notice, we're on the air together, or about 15 minutes. So spare tires. A spare tire, if you look in the trunk of a vehicle with a spare tire, you'll notice that the spare tire is actually an engineered component within the body of the vehicle to absorb some of the force of a rear-end collision. Okay, so that spare tire is a strong piece of steel. It's got the rubber tire to absorb some of the shock. The steel absorbs some more, and it protects the people inside more than if you don't have one. Think about that. Okay, so we have a lift here, a rotary lift. We can put cars up in the air and walk under them. If you were to see what is behind that plastic covering of what is considered the new bumper on the front or the rear of a vehicle, you would be shocked. Literally, it's a stamped piece of steel, usually. In some Volvos, older Volvos, it was forged or cast aluminum. But new vehicles, it's a stamped piece of steel with styrofoam, and then the plastic bumper. So from the outside, it's this plastic skin, this flexible plastic skin, a piece of styrofoam, like you would have in a cooler if you bought a cooler to keep your food from getting warm on the way home from the store, or one of those little kickboards that we used to have. We'd kick them around and hop on them and kick around a swimming pool. That styrofoam. And I'm not exaggerating, about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches thick. And then the stamped steel, which would be the real bumper. But it's nowhere near as strong as the bumpers used to be. Nowhere near. So that's what's there in the front and the back of the new cars. So you've lost the spare tire on many vehicles, and if you're going to buy a new vehicle, the answer is don't do it. Make sure you get an older vehicle, like somewhere around, in my opinion, somewhere around 2000, maybe a 2001, 2, 3, or 4. That's it. I wouldn't go any newer than that because they use more steel. And what manufacturers have been doing is they let the accountants loose. They said, okay, guys, go on out and look at these cars. We know you don't know anything about them, but go and look and see if you find some things we can take off the cars. And then make a list, and whoever can take more things off the car for the new production year, you win. And we'll do that. And that's what they've been doing. We'll be right back. Steve Elkins is with us. He's an emergency room nurse, 27 years experience, intensive care nurse, and he lives in Florida. And as you heard on the news, Hurricane Dorian spares Puerto Rico, but is strengthening, and it will be stronger by the time it reaches Florida on Labor Day. And it could be one of the worst storms to hit Florida in 3 decades. Winds in open waters were about 85 miles an hour. In the Virgin Islands, there are power outages, and people are preparing. Steve, let's talk about preparedness, what you do in times like this, and what other people do, and what some people don't do that they should do?
Well, Vincent, I started when I moved down here. I've lived here before. This is several times returning back. This is my final return to the state of Florida. I'm living here. I'm going to retire here. I'm going to die here. So I know what has to be done, what you're supposed to do. So there's never been a problem in my household of how to be prepared. There are plenty of government sites out there which probably never get much hits, very many hits to tell you how to get prepared, what you really need, the essentials. But I've always known, so because I'm kind of a preparedness kind of guy. So food, water, of course, dry goods, fuel, generator, make sure it's a working generator, medicine, dog food medicine, ammo, firearms. There's a whole list of things you need to do, and there's things you should be prepared to do, and waiting till the last minute. It seems to be that Americans, and I'm going to use your little acronym in GDP, the general dumb population. They're risk takers, so they risk at everything. They gamble too much, they eat too much, they drive without seat belts, they drive around motorcycles without a helmet. So why would it be any different to lollygag and just wait to the last minute and say, hey, you know what, this thing's really going to hit. Now I need supplies. Guess what? Shelves are all empty. And now you're going to go knock on a neighbor's door to say, hey, will you help us out? And I think you know how I'd answer that one now, because I am a much wiser person these days. That people who have the ability to prepare and have failed to prepare for emergencies like this, they'll be the ones. They'll be the ones coming to ask, playing the pity game, and then if you don't, they'll take. So that's why I mentioned having firearms and enough ammo to take care of yourself and defend what you have, your needs. But, I went to Walmart yesterday. It wasn't really to buy anything. We got plenty of water storage. We got plenty of fuel for generators. Everything's all up to up. I just had to pick up some grocery stuff. But I did notice what people are walking out with, because they hadn't prepared all along. You live here, you know when the hurricane season starts and when it ends. So why do people wait this far out when the season is starting? It started a couple weeks ago. Why are they doing this? Beyond me. Beyond me, it's the same people that never take the warning serious. But I can also blame, I'm just going to tell you this, I'm also blaming a little bit of the Weather Channel. Now, if you ever watch the Weather Channel is doom and gloom almost every time when they talk about a storm. They've become that little boy that cries wolf all the time. And I think they've done that so much that people around here go, well, the Weather Channel, they're doom and gloom. Everything is always hyped up to be more than it really is. And a lot of times that's the truth. The Weather Channel overstates the necessity, the urgency, or the magnitude of a storm. They're very famous for that. They get more ratings, they get more advertising dollars, and it's just fun to talk about disaster. And then they have their little spin-off shows of, look at this. So I can blame some of that agency there, the Weather Channel, for some of this problem. But people who've lived here long enough, actually I think the ones who've lived here long enough, been here a long time, have learned to take these things serious. And if it fizzles out and turns into nothing, well, then that's fine because you're still prepared. But there's a lot of risk takers. And I saw people walking out with things, and this was their necessity list. Alcohol. Making sure we got enough beer, alcohol for the storm. And I guess they are sitting on top of their mobile homes in a flooded region there, waiting for the helicopter to come pick up, holding a Bud Light. But these are the people that we shouldn't waste too much time on. They are the GDP, the general dumb population, but that's what our government spends the most time on and wastes the most money on, people like that. So in a nutshell, I said, be prepared. You live in this state, you know what's coming, and don't wait to the last minute. There's checklists you can find online, and fulfill that checklist. I have a runaway bag if I need to, with my papers, everything that's important to me. We simply pick up and we run. I have a weather radio that is battery operated, monitoring the situation where we are. There's things we can do that people just aren't doing, and later on play that victim card.
Okay. I agree with everything you said. And we talked about food. And here's a real simple thing. Do you really need freeze-dried food? The answer is no. Not for this kind of a situation. you can go to the store when it's on sale ahead of time, expecting that maybe someday there's going to be a storm, maybe the shelves are going to be bare, maybe it's going to be chaos at the Chinese factory outlet, the day or two before the storm. So you can go and buy cans of baked beans. Check the dates. They keep a long time if you keep them at a constant temperature.
Yeah.
If you got a basement and it's not moldy and damp, it's relatively dry, you can store them down there. They'll keep for years. They'll keep for a couple years past the date. But push on the top of the can. If it starts to bulge, do not eat it, okay?
Right.
So that's one thing you can do. So baked beans, you can buy it on sale for 39 cents a can. You can go to Aldi and get them there. And that's probably the regular price, maybe even 49 cents now that we have inflation rearing its head. But 39 cents, 49 cents a can, get a case of them. And get a mechanical manual can opener, because you may not have electricity. Everybody should have one of those. The kind that has you can actually open a flat top can by putting a triangular cut in it, a lift up can opener.
That was the military P-37.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right.
They're great. Great tool.
Right. And you can buy them at the Chinese factory outlet. They're still available, probably around $1. I don't know. We haven't bought one in 40 years, but probably around $1. You used to get them if you bought beer at the local alcohol selling stores. They used to give you these can openers, and they would say Rheingold or Schlitz or Pabst or something like that. It was a trinket, an advertising trinket. And so alcohol is not even on my list. I wouldn't even think about that. Why would I want to become dehydrated in a situation where I have to be at my peak mental capacity? Why would I want to lower my my understanding of the situation by dumbing myself down with alcohol? Why would I want to do that? That's like the dumbest thing I can think of in a situation like this. You're sitting on your roof waiting for a helicopter to come by, and so what do? You have a few Bud Lights. Really, that's insanity.
Yeah.
The next thing is water. Now, there's all kinds of water that you can buy, or you can save your 2-liter bottles, rinse them out, and fill them with tap water. If you have tap water, it probably has chlorine and fluoride in it anyway. So if you keep it in the dark, it'll probably last for months and months. And what you can do is rinse out those bottles and then refill them with fresh water after a couple of months to keep them fresh. Now, what you also can do, and this is what we do, is we will squeeze out about 10% of the volume of a 2-liter bottle, fill it with water, and then have about, so the water can expand about 10%. Put the cap on it, put it in the freezer. Have a bunch of them. And what that does is that will keep the cold in your in your freezer. Okay? So if you decide to go buy some meat and you bring your cooler with you, you take out that 2-liter bottle, and that will keep the meat cold or cool while you bring it home. And it's also a spare water container. You can always let that ice in the bottle turn back to liquid, and now you've got 2 liters of water. But there's another thing you can do. And if you go to the store and you want to buy milk jug style water bottles or water jugs, 1 gallon, you can buy spring water or you can buy distilled water. Now, what I do is I buy distilled water. Why? Because if I have to top off the coolant or the antifreeze in a vehicle, I use distilled water. So I have distilled water. I also top off batteries, whether they be a automotive battery, a truck battery, or a solar system battery. I use distilled water only for that. So what I'm saying is, for that 94 cents a gallon, you can have water, and you can top off your automotive batteries, or you can drink it. So dual purpose, same 94 cents. Those are just thoughts on food and water. Generator.
Let's go back to the water thing real quick here, Vince,
Sure.
because you mentioned something very interesting you and I have talked about, because I'm a winemaker also. But when you talked about taking the water bottles and freezing them and putting those in your freezer, great idea. That is a concept called thermal mass. lowering temperature by use of thermal mass, and we use that in winemaking all the time. So that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
And, you know, I learned this many, many years ago. Back, I think, in the 60s, my aunt bought a new refrigerator. And the guy that delivered the refrigerator to her house said, now, look, if you keep this thing empty, it's going to run and run and run a lot, and your electric bill is going to be higher. But if you keep a lot of food in it, you'll have that thermal mass, as you were talking about, Steve. And that will maintain the cool temperature inside the refrigerator, and the compressor will not be called on to cycle so often.
Right.
Because it takes about 3 times the amount of energy to start the refrigeration compressor as it takes to keep that compressor running. So starting and stopping uses a lot more electricity than if the refrigerator or the freezer, stopping and starting just uses the most amount of electricity. So you want to minimize that. And you can minimize that with thermal mass. So if you don't have a lot of food in there, you can put these bottles of water. But remember, water is the only substance that expands both when heated and when cooled. So if you fill a 2-liter bottle completely full with water, no air, and you put it in the freezer, it'll probably break. But if you squeeze it so that 10% of that volume of water has been pushed out of the bottle, and then you put the cap on, so now you have a dent in the bottle where you squeezed it, then as the water expands, as it freezes, it won't crack the bottle. So you can put those bottles in the refrigerator and in the freezer, or either and or in the refrigerator and the freezer, or refrigerator or the freezer. Take your pick. But that's what we do, and it really works. And how much does it cost? It's free. It's free. When we come back, Steve, let's talk about generators. Let's talk about how we hook them up, why we hook them up that way, and are you ready? I mean, you can have a generator, and what most people do is they have these orange extension cords, which to me is crazy. But that's what they do. We'll talk about that when we come back. How to do it right with Steve Elkins. Steve Elkins is with us, and we're talking about preparation for a storm like the one that is going to hit Florida in the next few days. Steve, how would you hook up a generator, or do you want me to talk about that?
You know, that's probably better your expertise, to be honest with you. I've got one, and I know how to use it. And I'm actually, my electrician guy, I called him a couple of days ago, and he flew back to California to take care of some family stuff. But I'm going to actually have a connection to my house that we can actually, plug into the side of the house where the box is, basically, and run the entire house. So that's not done yet, unfortunately. Like I said, we just got this house that's kind of getting moved in still. But that is on the list to be done, and it's not done. But I can still run the essentials off this generator. I've got 9,000 peak watts. I can run a lot of stuff off it, but I'm going to have to do it a different way, not the way I want to do it. So I'll let you carry this one.
Well, good thing you got that book from Black and Decker.
Right in front of me.
It's in the book. Class, if you decide that you want to undertake something like this, and I think you certainly can do it, okay? If you buy the same book that I bought mine many years ago. It's Black and Decker's complete, I don't know the exact title, but it's something like Complete Guide to Home Wiring.
That's
but in there,
yep.
Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Okay.
Looking at it
It
right
is
here.
a paperback. It's glossy pages, lots of pictures, typically more than one picture per page. It talks about wall switches, wall outlets, circuit panels, generators, 3-way switches, 4-way switches, overhead lighting, how to wire, new wiring, old wiring, the types of boxes, the types of wire cable, how many watts, how many amps, how many volts. Everything you need to know is in this book. Now, it's the same book that I used when I wired our farmhouse here in Missouri. And I wanted to do it according to code, and I did. Actually, I exceeded the code. And so it'll talk about the wiring connectors, the wiring nuts, and and some of the best practices that you can use for your home. So here's what I did. At the time, we didn't have solar power, so this would probably apply to most people listening. So this would be a traditional wiring of a home. You've got a meter outside, and you've got a circuit breaker panel inside. And what you do is you install what's called, this is the best practice. What you would do is install what's called a transfer switch. And a transfer switch it comes in a couple different sizes, 100 amp, 200 amps. And the 100 amp is way less expensive. Probably will cost somewhere around $150. A 200 amp version will cost, well, I think I paid around $225 years ago. So we're probably in the $325, $350 neighborhood today. And what it is a 3-position switch. So we'll say one position is up, one position is in the middle, center, and one position is down. And what up would be, the way I would wire it, would be the grid. The grid is connected in the up position. In the center position of this lever that you pull would be disconnect, meaning you are not connected to anything. And then the down position would be the generator position. So you're either connected to the grid, you're not connected to anything, or you're connected to your generator. And what you do is you just hook your generator into this transfer switch. And the transfer switch sits between your meter base outside your home and your circuit breaker panel. It's as simple as that. And then what happens is when you lose power, you simply pull this lever and go into generator mode. But before you've done that, you've started the generator, you have it running at the proper speed. It's been running for a minute or so to get the generator engine all lubricated, the oil circulating. You check your voltage. Some generators have a voltage meter, some have an amp meter. And then once you have it running at 240 volts, you throw the switch. Now everything in your house, everything that's connected to your main breaker is now connected to the generator. So the way to do that is you would typically have a cable coming from this transfer switch. Typically it's about a 30 amp cable. If you were to buy one at Harbor Freight, the Chinese tool outlet, it would be about $40. And it would have the connectors on both ends, one for connecting to your transfer switch and one for connecting to the generator. It's about a 10 or 15 foot long cable. You want to make sure your generator is outside. You do not want exhaust in your garage. You want that thing to be outside. And you want air to cool it. So what you do is you make sure that you've turned off all the circuit breakers that you don't think you want to power. And that would be like your hot water heater, your electric stove. Those are two items at your heat pump, because you're not going to be able to power them with a typical 5,000 through 10,000 watt generator. You just won't have enough capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. But you want to shut off all the breakers and then power them on one at a time, starting with the most important one first. And you're not going to be able to run all the things that you want. So if you want your well and your TV and everything else running at the same time, you're probably going to have to choose what's the most important. We'll be right back and continue this discussion with Steve Elkins. We'll also talk about boarding. All set? Hour number 2 of USA Prepare. Steve Elkins is with us. Dr. Richard Allen Miller has laryngitis. He'll be back next Thursday. And we're talking about the storms. We're talking about how to prepare and our thoughts on food, water, generators, and so forth. And the topic right at the moment is generators. So what you should do, class, is avoid trying to power certain things that draw a lot of electricity. And what are they? Those are those devices with resistive heating elements. Like if you look in your toaster and it glows red, that's a resistive heating element. If you look at your electric stove, your cooktop, your electric oven, you've got a red an element that glows red. That's powered by electricity and draws a tremendous amount of current. If you were to look inside your hot water heater, you'd see an element very much like in your stove, but it's immersed in water, and it gets really hot, and that draws a tremendous amount of current. So the things that you should not be powering with your little generator, your 5,000 to 7,000 watt generator, are things like toaster, electric oven, electric range, electric iron, electric baseboard heat, electric space heater, electric hot water heater. Anything that has a resistive element is going to draw a lot of current. And you might even find out that, for example, let's say you've got your cable hooked up to your generator and your transfer switch. You've got all your circuit breakers off on your breaker panel, and you've got your generator running, and you just turn on one item. Let's say it's the hot water heater. You might find it will stall the generator right then and there all by itself. Or if you were to turn on your electric stove, just one item, turn on a burner with your electric stove, it may stall the generator as well. So what do you absolutely need in your emergency to have? Those are the only breakers that you should be turning on one at a time. Steve, your thoughts?
No, I agree. The most important gets attention. That big screen TV is really unnecessary. Like I said, I have a weather radio, and it's battery operated, and I just hit the button and get the current updates, what's going on here, and I'll be doing that here. Actually, I've been looking at it closely. But I guess come Friday, we'll be getting some bad weather on Friday, sometime Friday and Saturday. So, yeah, the necessities, always the most important things come first. Prioritize it the right way. And no, exactly those people we were talking about with the Bud Light sitting on top of the roof, they didn't have any priorities. That was their priority. But no, right on the money, priorities first, the most important in your household things that you need running. And the frivolous things, you can wait 5 days without your TV. You're not going to die. Not important.
Right. So let's talk about those orange extension cords. So typically what would happen is a person would buy a generator and possibly check the oil level before using it for the very first time. That'd be a good thing to do. Make sure that you've got plenty of oil, because if you don't, the oil is the only thing that's cooling the internal moving parts of that engine. The oil transfers the heat from the really hot surfaces to the cylinder head and to the cylinder fins for removal of that heat. So you've got to use the right oil. I'll tell you what the right oil is in a second. Back to the extension cords. So if you've got a 100-foot extension cord, it will be stamped along the cord in lots of locations, frequently the thickness of the wire. And the wire is mentioned in gauge. It might be called AWG, American Wire Gauge, or gauge. And the numbers are like this: 18, 16, 14. The smaller the number, the thicker the wire. So a 14-gauge extension cord will handle a lot more current than a 16, and that'll handle more than an 18. So 18 is really, really light. So one thing to look at on your extension cords is when you're using them, do they get warm, especially at the ends? Do they get warm? If they get warm, you're looking at a potential failure and possible fire hazard. And the ones that are really of poor construction are the ones that have the molded, soft ends. Okay, you could squeeze them a little bit with a pair of pliers, and they would return to their original shape. Those don't have enough strength to press tightly against the plug that goes into them. I'm talking about the female end. That's the one you really have to be concerned about the most. So if it gets warm while you're using it, then that extension cord is too thin. And then if that 100-foot cord doesn't work, a person might be tempted to stick another 100 on there, or a 50, or a 25. The more connections you have, the more heat at the connections, the more current is lost. Okay? Right. So the longer, the worse. The more connections, and that's worse as well. So you want to use the shortest, heaviest extension cord that you have. And 14 is better than 16. 16 gauge is better than 18. So have them ahead of time. And you can buy extension cords, 50-foot extension cords, for $10. As a matter of fact, you might even be able to get 100-foot extension cords for $10 when they're on sale. And you might even be able to find them and have them shipped to you. Tax exempt.
I haven't even checked on Amazon on what 100 would cost. I saw the cheapest one I saw for a 16 gauge for 100 foot was right around $19. That's the cheapest I've ever seen.
Okay. So, well, I bought I bought a bunch of them. They were about $10. I bought about 6 of them, and I use them for different purposes. I cut them in half, and I use them I hook them up to my battery chargers.
Right.
I've got a whole bunch of them in the barn, and I bought these heavy-duty cables, cable clamps, and I solder the extension cords, these 50-footers. They used to be 100 feet, cut them in 2, and then I have the battery chargers hanging on the wall, and I just bring the 50-foot cable over to the devices, like, the diesel trucks, the tractors, and so forth, and I charge the batteries all winter long, but I need a whole bunch of them, like 6 of them running it all at the same time. So that's another use of an extension cord. But the smallest I like is 16 gauge. That's the absolute smallest.
Right.
That I would consider.
Vinny, you want to touch bases on something else before then you get into the meat of this?
Yeah.
The generators themselves, there's so many out there. What should the average consumer, for an emergency, what should they be looking for? As far as there's so much on these. I've got a Champion, and that's what Sam's Club or Costco had at the time. Some of them are run by both power, whether it's natural, either it's gas or it's propane. I kind of wish I had the one that did either or. I only have gasoline on mine, but I guess there's conversion kits you can buy to convert it over. But what would we be looking for as far as brand, and what we'd be looking for as far as accessories on what we actually need on these generators?
Okay. You're going to find that for the residential use that all of these generators are going to be air-cooled. And here's something to consider. If you buy one that has a name like Champion or Coleman or Homelight, that's an older name. I think they're done. But one of those, typically 5,000 watts to 5,500 watts, roughly 8 horsepower. By the way, class, 746 watts is 1 horsepower. 746 watts is 1 horsepower. So if you get one of those, it's going to be air-cooled, it's going to be single cylinder, it's going to be loud, and it's going to run at wide open throttle. And generators, as we call them generators, but they're really called generator sets. So I'm going to use the term generator to mean generator sets. So a generator set is an engine, typically a gasoline engine for the home, and the generator. So they're connected together, so the output, the crankshaft, if you will, of the engine, the gasoline engine, is directly coupled to the generator. And that generator set is sold as a unit with a gas tank and maybe an outlet panel where you can plug in your devices. When you buy one of those, gasoline-powered or propane-powered, it runs at 1 speed. That speed is 3,600 RPM, which is pretty much wide open throttle for that generator. And if you were to run it at night, and if it were dark out at night, you would see that muffler would be glowing red hot. No exaggeration. Literally, it would be red. You just don't see that it's red during the day. It's red. But those generators have a typical life expectancy of 30 days. And this is not an exaggeration. So if you were to start one up and run it all day and then change the oil at the recommended level, which is after 25 hours, and then start it right up after you change the oil and did that every day, you change the oil 30 times in that month, that engine would be shot by the end of the month. That is their life expectancy. Now, the reason we don't know that, and the same thing is true with lawnmowers, push lawnmowers, that's how long the engine is designed to last. The reason we don't know that is we don't run the generators or lawnmowers nonstop for 30 days, except for changing the oil. So they have a very short life expectancy. So we might use it an hour or two, and then 6 months later we might use it an hour or two. So they hang out in our garage for a long time. The thing to look at is get the smallest generator that will serve your needs. And the reason is because if you're going to get one of these typical emergency standby generators, the kind that maybe 2 people could carry, or that has a set of wheels to roll it around, the thing that you should do is get the smallest, because when it runs, it's going to run at wide open throttle. So it's going to use a lot of fuel when you're not demanding a lot of current from it. So if you have a great big one, let's say you have a 10,000 watt, but you could get by with a 5,000 watt, you're probably going to use almost twice as much fuel. That's something that we don't...
Let me back up real quick. Can I back up real quick on something?
Sure.
You mentioned about loads and the heating elements of different things. So on a refrigerator, or a freezer, with the kind of loads, electrical loads those take, they're not a heating element per se. But so would you recommend from the generator to a good size freezer or a good size refrigerator a 14 gauge over a 16 gauge on the extension?
I would.
Okay.
Now here's how refrigerators work. Refrigeration today, most refrigerators, there are a few that use ammonia evaporative systems that do not have compressors. But if your refrigerator makes noise, you hear this humming of the compressor when it fires up, you know that it's going to use more current to start that compressor than it is to continue running that compressor. The proof of that is if you have an air conditioning unit, whether it be a window unit or a whole house unit, when that compressor starts up, typically the lights will dim a little bit, right? That's because it's demanding a lot more current to start it than it needs to keep running. So your refrigerator, when it fires up, or your freezer, needs to be able to get that current and not be starved for the current, because if it is starved, it's going to be really rough on the electric motor within the compressor. So you want the right gauge. So the answer to your question is simply yes. 14 gauge is what I would use. Okay. And the shortest 14 gauge extension cord to get your generator outside the house. That's what you want to do.
Got it.
We can talk more about that when we come back. We're going into a commercial break. Do you have any other questions you want me to think about during the break? Generators?
Yeah, what is the shortest extension I can get for 14 gauge? I mean, that's when I make it outside. 20?
25 feet, 50 feet, 75 and 100. That's what they come in. We'll be right back. Steve Elkins is with us, and we're talking about generators. And we talked about wire gauge, 14 being the heaviest, 16 being a little thinner, and 18 gauge being really thin. And I would not use anything with a generator less than 16 gauge, and the shorter the extension cord, the better. In class, you can spend a lot of money on extension cords, or you can get a good one for not too much money. And what you need to do is look at the ends, the connector ends, the plug and the receptacle on the end of the extension cord. And if they are made just of vinyl and they're not reinforced, then that extension cord is probably going to get heated. That connector end is going to get hot over time, because that pressure that the metal contacts within the female end are not held together with a durable material. Okay? Just the same material as pretty much the extension cord, that vinyl. And that's the problem. So you should feel with your hand carefully to see if that extension cord is getting warm. If it does, that is not heavy enough for the job that you're having it do. So when you buy extension cords, you'll find out that you can buy let's say a 50-foot extension cord for a 14 gauge for maybe $20. Then there'll be another one for like $40. But look at the ends and you'll see that they're different. And you want the toughest, the strongest, most durable end that you can get for this particular time when you have an emergency. But if you take your time and you buy it when it's not the rush hour, meaning when everyone else is buying them, you'll be able to find it on sale. And that's what I do. Okay. Sometimes I even cut off the cheap extension cord ends and I put on a more durable one that I wire on myself. So, and
Vincent,
you'll be able to, yes.
Yeah. What about, okay, so you're running, let's say you got your generator outside away from the house, so you don't bring the fumes in the house, you got your 14 gauge extension cord running to your garage for your refrigerator, your second refrigerator, and maybe your freezer there, big freeze, and you have one of these extensions that plug into the female on the 14, which has 3 receptacles, plug-ins. Will that cause a problem, or should you have separate 14 gauges going to each item on a freezer and a fridge?
Well, if I were doing it, I have some of those black Walmart extension cords. I bought a bunch of them for the expo, and they were not heavy loads. They were just people, wanted to have little lights on their tables and things like that. So that was not a problem in terms of current draw through the 14 gauge extension cord. But In your case, I would want to run a separate cord under most circumstances for each of the one to the refrigerator and one to the freezer. That's what I would want to do.
Okay.
And the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that when they power up, they don't power up at the same time.
Right.
Okay? The reason is both of them are, whenever you start a compressor, it's going to take 3 times the current to start it. So you don't want 3 times the current to start it at the same time you have 3 times the current for the other device. Okay?
Right.
So you want to start them up separately. Now that can be, 10 seconds apart. That'd be fine. So what you do is you turn down the thermostat in the freezer before you hook it up, and you turn down the thermostat in the refrigerator before you hook it up, and then you power one up by turning on the thermostat. You turn it up, and then you listen to the sound of the engine, and you'll hear it, the engine speed decrease, and then it will resume normal speed. And it's time to try the other one. And if the engine speed doesn't decrease too much, you're good to go. If it does, you're overloading or you're running that generator too hard.
Okay.
And
good enough.
Is it time to talk about engine oil for the generators?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I ran out, during the break, I ran out into our shop and I grabbed a jug of Mobile Delvac. Now, you can buy Delvac, you can buy Delo, you can buy Rotella, but this is called Mobile Delvac, DELVAC 1300 Super. And it has the viscosity of 15W40. So that means 15 winter, 40 rest of the year, summer. And so it's 40 weight when you want it to be thick, and it's 15 weight in the winter. And this one is this is diesel, high performance, heavy duty diesel engine oil. And it says on the label, this is for use in new and older engines found in trucking, mining, construction, quarrying, and agricultural industries. Okay. It also meets the service requirements for Caterpillar, Cummins, Detroit Diesel, Mercedes-Benz, Volvo, etc. That's what you want to use, in my opinion, in your air-cooled generator, because the 5W30 they recommend is too thin, in my opinion. We'll be right back. Steve Elkins is with us, and we're talking about preparedness and generators. Just wanted to mention tomorrow, Steve and I are going to be talking about the Laclede Electric Cooperative Board of Directors election, or selection, that I was part of. And Ron Gibson of the Ron Gibson channel on YouTube is preparing a video, and he's going to post it. I think he'll have it up today for you to see on the Ron Gibson channel on YouTube for USA Prepares. And you'll see the 7 candidates on stage, each speaking for about 2 minutes. I'm the third in the series, so if you happen to watch it and you see a bunch of people that don't look like me, that's because I'm third. And if you happen to look at this video, you'll see me standing on the extreme left side of the stage, looking around, looking at the police, looking at the officials, looking at the guys with the signs, that say "Time's Up," those kinds of things. So you'll see me looking around. And if you're wondering why I'm distracted, it's because I'm actually paying attention. And you'll see these other guys standing there almost like they're frozen. So that'll be a special broadcast. I'm not going to tell you how the election turned out, but I am delighted, absolutely delighted with the results of that election. And I mentioned 5W30 engine oil. That's typically what many of the manufacturers recommend. I believe it's too thin. And 5W30 engine oil does not have the additive package necessary for flat tappet engines. Those would be the kinds of engines that you see in these air-cooled generators. So my choice, what I use, is diesel engine oil because it has a much heavier duty additive package to resist wear. That's what I use. I'm not telling anyone to use it. Use your own judgment, do your own research, but that's what I do. And you mentioned
Vincent,
propane.
you would say that would supersede a synthetic oil?
Well, synthetic oil is great. It really is. However, the problem here is an air-cooled engine runs at way higher temperatures than a water-cooled engine. So I want to have zinc and phosphorus as additives in the engine oil additive package for those extreme conditions. Because if you think about it, if you were to use automotive engine oil, meaning car engine oil, gasoline car engine oil. How often do you ride with that accelerator at wide open throttle, foot to the floor? How often? Maybe once in a while for a few seconds, but that's not the condition with a generator. That generator is foot to the floor, wide open throttle, as long as you're running it. Okay? So in that case, I want to have the heaviest duty additive package I can find, and that's what you find in diesel engine oil. And 5W30 to me is too thin. And especially in Florida, the weather is getting hotter, and we are seeing air-cooled engine failures more than we've ever seen before, because the problem is the heat outside. These 85, 90, 100-degree days, people are using their lawnmowers. Lawnmowers are running at wide open throttle also, or almost wide open throttle. So what happens is you're using 80, 90, 100-degree outside air to cool off the engine. So it's not like you're running it in the winter when you have 30-degree or 20-degree air cooling off your air-cooled engine. You're using hot air to cool off a really hot engine. So that's why I'd want to use a higher viscosity engine oil, like 15W40, with the diesel engine heavy-duty additive package. Okay. And it will say on there, on the container, that you can also use it in gasoline engines. But people would typically not want to use diesel engine oil because it says diesel engine oil.
Right.
But it is, if you look at a diesel engine, you won't see any sludge in it because the additive package is really good at scrubbing away the sludge. If you look at a gasoline engine, you pop the valve cover off a gasoline engine, you'll see that typically they have a lot of sludge. So that's another reason why I like diesel engine oil for this particular purpose. But do your own research. Now, we talked about propane. You mentioned propane versus propane, natural gas versus gasoline, right? Is that a question you'd like answered?
Actually, I had two choices now. The new model for Champion, I don't even think they sell the gasoline. They sell gasoline and propane models, so either or, whatever source you want to use, you can have the choice. Mm-hmm. But mine's only gasoline, unfortunately.
Okay, so here's the lowdown on that. Gasoline, let's say it will produce 100 units of energy per gallon. Propane, natural gas, rough numbers, 90 units. So you get about 10% less energy in the propane and natural gas. So if you take a 5,000 watt generator, 5,000 running watts, not peak watts, but actual running watts, you'll get about 4,500 running watts out of propane or natural gas. So you're not going to get as much. And it's still going to run at that 3,600 RPM. Gas, propane, natural gas typically run at 3,600 RPM, wide open throttle for the engine. If you were to buy a diesel generator, now diesel is going to be way more expensive. I bought a diesel generator. It's a used, probably from the 80s or the 90s, military surplus. It weighs over 1,000 pounds. It's only 5,000 watts. 5,000 watts, 1,000 pounds. It's the size of a refrigerator, a stand-up refrigerator, but it would be turned on its side. So this thing is really heavy, really heavy. It uses about a half a gallon of diesel fuel per hour. It's 5,000 watts. It's really, really loud. It takes two batteries to start it, 2 car batteries or 2 truck batteries to start it. But it is a real 5,000 watts. It's actually probably more like 7,000 or 8,000 watts. And it will just run and run and run. And it's designed to run for a very long time. Probably life expectancy would be 8,000 or more hours, which is what a farm tractor would be expected to last. So I paid, I think, $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 for it, used, and it works great. If you want to look up the model, it's an MEP-002A. It's a 2-cylinder Onan diesel generator, and I have it hooked up to a transfer switch. So if the power were to fail and I didn't have solar as a backup, I would just go out, start the generator, take me about 2 minutes to start it, get it set to 240 volts, adjust the throttle. It runs at 1,800 RPM, and then I would throw the transfer switch, and the whole house would be up and running. But I have already made the precautions of not being dependent on an electric hot water heater, not being dependent on an electric stove, or those kinds of devices. But if you run a generator, you're probably not going to get your heat pump to work, class. In most cases, your generator will probably not be big enough to run your heat pump. So you have to have figure out another way of heating your house or cooling your house if you have to. Typically, just go into the basement where it's cool and ride out the storm, as long as it's not a flooding situation.
Yeah. So, Vincent, your APU, your generator, is this the equivalent of what I use in the military, the auxiliary power unit that I would connect to my airplane and fire it up? Is this the same thing you've got, kind of the same equipment?
Well, this thing doesn't have wheels. I don't know if you, but this thing is, it's 2 cylinders. It's really heavy, and it could be. It actually could be.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And was that diesel powered?
I believe it was. Yeah, and they run all day. We'd be working on aircraft and plugged in with electronics, and we'd be on the aircraft many hours. That thing would be fired up and running the whole entire time. It was a workhorse power unit.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what this thing is. Now, this was designed for a camp. So you have a bunch of military, in a camp, and it would supply electricity for the entire camp.
Okay, got it.
And they didn't care about the noise so much because, typically in those situations, there's, all kinds of noise from projectiles, either taking off or landing.
Got it.
And so if you think about it, $1,000, $1,100, $1,200, in the scheme of things, if you're willing to, buy a used one and run the risk of having something go wrong and trying to figure out how to fix it, that's probably 1/3 the price of a home unit, right? Is that about right?
Right. All right.
I mean, the home unit's 1/3 the price. Okay, so then the next thing is ethanol in the gasoline. So ethanol, I called Troy Built. I was livid that the carburetor would fail in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, and because of the ethanol in the gasoline, the ethanol eats the carburetors, and it causes them to corrode. So they don't build their carburetors to sustain the alcohol, which draws water into the gasoline. So water, the condensation in the fuel tank, mixes with the ethanol, which mixes with the gasoline. So instead of having little droplets of water that get filtered out, that water goes right into the carburetor, and it consumes or corrodes the carburetor. So when I called Troy Built to say, what gives with these carburetors to keep failing? They said, well, no, you don't understand. Carburetors are now a maintenance item. Now think about that. So you know that a spark plug is a maintenance item. You know an air filter is a maintenance item. You know the engine oil is a maintenance item. Now they're saying that the carburetor is a maintenance item because they get destroyed by the ethanol in the fuel. And they said, have you used this whatever fuel? And I said, no, tell me about that. And they said, well, you can get it at Walmart. It's $20 a gallon. Now, that $20 a gallon fuel won't corrode the carburetor. Now, who in the right mind is going to use the fuel in a lawnmower or a riding mower or a weed whacker or a rototiller that's $20 a gallon?
All right.
Nobody I know. So if you want to avoid that, then what you would do is you'd want to buy gasoline that is the ultra premium without ethanol. Okay, and it's going to cost a lot more, but that's one way of avoiding some of these problems. If you don't want to do that, if you want to use the regular unleaded fuel that's recommended by the manufacturer, then what you should do is when you're done using your generator, you want to run it out of fuel. So you drain the fuel out of the tank, and you run the generator until it stalls from running out of fuel being in the carburetor. That way you won't have the carburetor being destroyed by the fuel sitting in it for a week or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. So that's the way we do it here at the farm. We will only put in the amount of fuel that we think we're going to use, like for the rototiller or a lawnmower. And then if it's toward the end of the season and we're not going to use it for 6 months, then we run it out of fuel. And then you're pretty sure to not have a carburetor problem later. If you do have a carburetor problem, you go to eBay and you can buy one on eBay, and carburetors can be, $10, $15, $20, $25 shipped.
Right.
So if you think you're going to be one of these preparedness-minded people, look up that engine model number, the make, Briggs & Stratton, or whatever the engine is, go to eBay, and you buy a Chinese carburetor, because that's what they use anyway. You're not going to get a USA carburetor in the first place from the manufacturer, so you might as well get it from China anyway. Have it in the box ready to go. Make sure it's the right one. And for between $10 and $25, you can have that spare carburetor, because it will fail if you use regular unleaded 10% ethanol gasoline. It's amazing how, I've got a tractor that's 57 years old. Can you imagine that? 57 years old, built in 1962. It's a Cub Cadet. It has a frame. The mower deck has never needed welding. It's never rusted, never rotted. It's got the original tires, all 4 tires on this little riding lawnmower. It's 10 horsepower, Kohler engine. It works great. Original tires, almost original everything, original blades. It's worn out 2 engines. It's on its 3rd engine. And yet this tractor has original tractor seat. It's never needed to be replaced. Nothing like these new pieces of junk they sell today. We'll be right back with us, and you can listen to Steve on his broadcast on republicbroadcasting.org. Off the Beaten Path is the name of the broadcast, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Sundays. Steve, do you have any other questions that you'd like to know?
Nothing on the generators. I think we did really well on that. You've touched a lot of bases, important things in there. What I do want to stress, because I'm going to go back to my medical background, is having being prepared for the medical emergencies of not being able to, let's say your medications, you have to have adequate supply of your medication. It's right now you're probably in trouble if you, unless you can get a doctor to write you a script for extra medications. But you should have medication. You should have an emergency pack set up. You should have your getaway pack, your getaway suitcase, or run out of town suitcase packed and ready to go. And definitely listen to the warnings when they say it's time to evacuate. It's coming. You better just take that serious and just go. Grab your medications, your food, what you need for your dog, your dog medicine, your medications. When you have to go, you have to go. But take the essentials, the most important things with you. And a lot of them are financial papers. People don't talk about that. Make sure those financial papers in your safe go along with you. You're going to need those if something really happens bad. So on the medical side, be medically prepared for your conditions and make sure you have your medication, lots of it, in case you need it.
Okay. I had a thought I wanted to share with the class today. It's a little off topic, but I think it's important. This applies to everything. So dog food, the kind of dog food that we buy, is price fixed in Springfield, Missouri. It's $38.99 a bag. It's Diamond Naturals. And so it's $38.99. So how do you buy dog food? How do you save a lot of money on dog food? I'm going to tell you the secret right now. It's really simple. So what you do is you do some shopping and make a few phone calls, and you find out where you can get the dog food for less. So here's what we did. So it's $38.99, but we found one store that sold it for $32.50. So we took that price, and we brought it to another store that has 5% senior discount. So the $32.50 price, they matched, and then they have on Wednesdays a senior discount. So now it's $30.88 for the $38.99 dog food. Okay? Almost, $8 difference in price, roughly. Then you can go to a store like Menards, and Menards has 11% off on everything sometimes. So you take the $30.88 receipt and you buy a bag there, and then Menards will discount it further to $27.48. So now you're paying $27.48 for what was $38.99. Now, if you buy 12 bags, and if you pay tax at 8%, 12 bags is going to be $505. You'll save $175 if you follow what I just said. Now, why would you do that? Because the stores are doing everything they can to take advantage of you. When they price fix, they are ganging up on you. So you can use their price matching to your favor. And does it work? Absolutely. And if you start your own business where you have a blog and you talk about dogs, or if you have a farm that uses dogs to protect the animals, the other animals, and is your security system, that could be tax exempt. So how much would you save if it were tax exempt? Oh, about $37 on 12 bags of dog food. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it above board? Absolutely. Is it bona fide? Absolutely. Will it pass the smell test with the IRS? Absolutely. If you have a business that could use dog food in your business. So, class, you need to start a business right now, so you can buy things tax exempt for your business. And that business can be anything you want. And the best business in the world, in my opinion, is a farm. And how big does a farm have to be? You pick it. You pick the size of your farm. Want it to be 1 acre? Fine. If you want it to be 100 acres? Fine. If you want it to be 1,000 acres? Fine. You determine how big your farm is, not them. Because they don't have rules that say, no, a farm has to be 52.7 acres. There's nothing like that. You decide what your farm's going to be. You might have a daisy farm. You might have a dandelion farm. Your thoughts, Steve Elkins?
No, I agree. The government, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because when I lived in California, the government, and we need to talk about this at some other point in time, a fallback plan on this, but the government has decided that they own the heavens, they own the rainwater that falls from the clouds. And I had people that are in the wine industry that have built these real nice ponds on their property, and they pump out and irrigate their grapes. And then, grapes, the vineyard takes a lot of water. And government's now coming back and saying, well, that pond is so big and so deep, there's approximately how many millions of gallons in there, and actually that's out of the circulation of the population. We actually own that. And they're looking for ways to tax that or take it or whatever, but I'd love to talk about that sometime.
Yeah, and we should. And I contacted a car dealer who put in an underground storage tank to divert the water or save the water that would run off his roof and down the parking lot into the sewer. And he caught that so he could wash cars with it on his parking lot. And the government came after him and told him that was their water. So he had to pay for the water that he collected from his gutters, leaders, and saved in his tank to wash the cars. Can you imagine that? Steve Elkins, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all your efforts and knowledge. I'll see you tomorrow.